You're watching France 24 and the business interview. Hello and welcome. I'm Markus Karlsson. There's no shortage of bad news coming out of the eurozone. Just ahead of the weekend, credit rater Fitch slashed Spain's credit rating by 3 notches. Fitch says there's a growing risk the country will take a hard hit as the eurozone crisis worsens. For more now on Spain, Greece and the eurozone crisis, I'm joined by Ludovic Subran. He's chief economist at the insurer Euler Hermes here in Paris. Welcome to France 24.
Hello, Marcus.
Now, Fitch's downgrade of Spain is really seen to underline the fact that the situation is getting worse and worse in Spain. In your mind, how bad is it?
Well, some time ago, we actually published an estimate of the banking recapitalization needs, and we estimated it to be around 90 billion euros, which is more or less what Fitch also said in its statement. I think
because that's really what's weighing down Spain at the moment,
yes.
the banking sector and the need to recapitalize them.
Exactly. The banking sector has been affected by the 2008 real estate bubble. So right now, there are a lot of assets in the banks that are actually deemed as not exactly what you could say healthy. And so in the end, I think the Bankia nationalization efforts, the 20 billion euros that Bankia needed to actually be recapitalized, was just the tip of the iceberg. And so everybody expects that the audit, both from the IMF and from the private auditing company, will actually reveal a much deeper sanitization needs for the banking system in Spain.
Now, you spoke there about the property bubble that burst back in 2008 to 2009 in Spain, and that's really seemed to be the number one reason that the Spanish banks are in trouble. But why has it taken so long for this problem to trickle down? Why in 2012 are we now looking at recapitalizing Spanish banks?
I think in the meantime, we had both a covariant shock, which is the financial crisis that was before the real estate bubble actually pricked in Spain. But then after that, we had this very sluggish recovery, which means that most household consumption has been depressed. And so the real estate repayment by households and the different other credit that have been, extended in the economy for the companies haven't been repaid. So basically, we are now in a situation with 25% unemployment, with a depressed, purchasing power for households, no real outlets for businesses, no profits. Basically, we're thinking that indeed these current situation, these limbos for Spain, are triggering this whole, sanitization of the banking sector needs, because you are in a situation where there's this vicious circle between mortgage loans and the real economy.
So basically things have just gotten worse and worse, with unemployment, for instance, also, as you just said there, reaching almost 25%.
Yes, and the economic policy is not adding, good news on this, because the austerity measures that have been taken in Spain are extremely deep. If you compare to Italy or the UK, there's been a stimulus plan alongside the austerity measures. In Spain, it's all about austerity. So you imagine that there will be no job creation, there will be no, consumption, no profits for companies, neither at the export level nor at the domestic level. So there is no real way out, rather than thinking about a direct intervention in the banks. And that's a little bit what's happening in Spain compared to other countries like Italy, which, if you remember, back in December, was also in the eye of the storm in the European crisis.
Speaking of interventions, there's growing speculation that Spain will have to ask for a bailout from the rest of the eurozone and the International Monetary Fund. What do you make of those risks? Will that happen?
I think it will be foolish for Spain not to ask. That's the real thing, because though it's possible for Spain to go for 20 billion in the market, short term they used to get 2%, for bonds issuance. Right now I think it will be much more complicated situation with the BBB grade that Fitch gave them. I think the idea now is, Spain cannot get out of this without the eurozone for different reasons. The first reason is, of course, because the magnitude of the amount that are needed for the banks, but also for the real economy. I mean, Spain has been doing the austerity measures, but they may need a growth window. And this can come from Europe. Instead of having always Europe come as, the bad guy, the bad cop saying you have to cut, Spain has been cutting by itself. But for the banking sector, they cannot do it by themselves. And so there has been some discussions about extending the economic stability mechanism with a direct intervention through the banking system that could actually recap Spanish banks without having to go through sovereign and without imposing new policy triggers, which is really the reason why the Spaniards have been hesitating to actually go and ask for help. They don't want the stigma around the actual, Spanish bailout, which I can understand, because they've been extremely disciplined about trying to get structural reforms into the country at a very fast pace, which is also the reason why now it's more complicated for them. There is no more room to maneuver, but they've been trying to do it by themselves. So now the idea is, how can the eurozone, through more federalism and a little bit of a change, a mind change on the way they can support countries more proactively, less as firemen, fire extinguisher, can actually support Spain in not getting into too dark, too deep waters, which is really what's happening right now with the further speculation about the Spanish bailout.
Now, if we look ahead, there's another Greek election coming up on the 17th of June, and there have been concerns that the result of that Greek election, if anti-austerity, anti-bailout parties win in Greece, that the country will be forced out of the eurozone. What would happen if that indeed is the case?
I think nobody wants to be responsible for pushing Greece out. And at EULA, for example, we still see Greece in because it is beyond economic incentives on both parts, the northern part of Europe and the southern part of Europe. It's about politics. Because in the end, should Greece exit or stay in, the cost will be roughly the same. Why? Because if Greece exits, the exposure on the banks is actually super high. But more importantly, just after Greece exits, you will have deep recession, hyperinflation. You will have at the border of the eurozone a country that will be in really deep troubles. And it would be foolish to think that neither the private sector that could actually make return on investment by investing in Greece, nor the public sector could actually go, public sector, I mean Germany, France, countries with which Greece has been tying links, political links. The administrative system should have to be reinforced, for example. You cannot imagine that those countries won't continue investing and somehow subsidizing a country that would be in such troubles. On the other hand, should Greece stay in, indeed it means thinking about how can we continue to support Greece without going for a further, austerity package that is just unbearable by the population? The Greeks are now getting salaries that they used to get at the end of the 90s. You cannot imagine socially that would get a further 20% cut in the salaries. So again, I think Greece will stay in because the Greeks themselves want to stay in, because Eurozone cannot really see Greece leaving without being, finger pointed as the bad guy that actually pushed the country into a very, very deep social unrest, type of very high political risk mess. So I think the idea is that they will have to keep it in.
Billionaire investor George Soros, he said that Eurozone leaders have run about 3 months ahead of them to ensure that the Eurozone actually survives. So what do you make of that time span? That's a message that we've been getting time and time again, by the looks of it, that we have 1 month, 2 months, 3 months.
I would say 3 weeks.
How long do we have?
It's a very tough question because, a lot of the current situation could have been solved back on July 21st, 2011, when we actually decided a little bit on how and what can we do about Greece now. The question now is, I think, anyhow, there are, it's a two-pronged approach. There are measures that you can take in the short run to make things easier and less speculative and making sure that the whole system doesn't suffer too much stress. And there are the long-term measures, and especially around federalism. So what is really tricky right now is that before the end of June, we have the Greek elections, we have the European Union ministers meeting, we have a real push into the banking union, into more federalism. We even think about, when and how, why not could Europe actually appoint a finance minister by the end of June, just to make sure that there is a reason to think that European stands as united, even though, in tumultuous time. So I think the time length, the duration of this whole situation is hard to predict, but I imagine that by the end of June, we will know where we stand. We've heard already that Chancellor Merkel has been much more lenient on the Eurobonds issues. So it's all a question of sequence for her. It's, if this, that, and this happen,
she wants to see people performing and behaving before she agrees to a possible Eurobond.
For an economist, we talk about the Germans' ordoliberalism, ordoliberalismus, which is by itself an economic, theory that has been taught only in Germany. And I think you have to suffer to actually get, the fruits of what you're doing. And so I think, for Germany, it's really important that all countries try at least to do, some fiscal discipline while boosting growth. And so when we see, this move on Germany, when we see the growth agenda emerging in the minds of everybody, when we see, the brains at work to find new tools to actually enrich the firepower of the Eurozone, I think, this month will be pivotal for the Eurozone.
But much has been made so far of the animosity between Angela Merkel and the new French president, François Hollande, if there is that kind of animosity. Do you think that the two will see eye to eye in the end because of the economic context, basically, that they'll have no other choice?
Well, I think there is no animosity whatsoever. The question is that they are both standing firm on what they think would work for Europe, and I think they are both right. You know, one is really advocating for growth. The question is, how do you finance growth? And this is what Chancellor Merkel is thinking. You know, why don't you raise taxes? Why don't you make sure that you reallocate public spending? Because most of the countries haven't done the necessary cuts to make sure that there is productive, cost-efficient spending in their public finances. So I think in the end, you know, the real question for the Eurozone will be how to create jobs, how to boost competitivity, not only through unit labor costs, but through other measures, and how to make sure that you put companies also at the center of this recovery. Because in the end, what you want is you want a strong private sector that can support this whole, you know, new normal in the Eurozone. And right now, the only thing we hear are not along these lines, unfortunately.
All right, Ludovic Febvre, pleasure as always to speak to you. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us once again. You're watching France 24. Do stay with us. We have more news coming your way.